In the serene expanse of Hawaii's breathtaking landscape, Chris Duddy, a 31-year-old camera assistant, found himself embarking on an assignment that was both exhilarating and foreboding. Having worked for the renowned special effects studio behind Star Wars, Chris was on a mission that veered significantly from the cloistered special effects studios of Hollywood he was accustomed to. This assignment was not just a thrilling deviation, but also a pivotal one for his career. Accompanying him was Mike Benson, a veteran in the realm of special effects photography. At 49, Mike's career had spanned over 2 decades, rich with experiences that blended art with adrenaline. His presence was not just that of a boss, but also a mentor and a friend, a camaraderie born out of numerous projects, including their work together on Terminator 2. Their objective was singular yet daunting, to capture stunning aerial footage for the movie Sliver, a thriller starring Sharon Stone. The essence of the assignment was to film over Pu'u O'o, a steaming crater within the vast and volatile expanse of Kilauea. This volcano, marked by its relentless activity, stood as one of the most potent symbols of nature's untamed spirit. As the helicopter, piloted by the experienced Craig Hosking, sliced through the Hawaiian skies, the breathtaking view unfolded like a living tapestry beneath them. The azure embrace of the ocean, the lush embrace of the jungle, and the golden kiss of sunshine painted a picture so surreal that Chris, in a moment of awe, vocalized his disbelief at being paid to witness such splendor. However, this assignment was far from a tranquil joyride. The goal was to capture the raw, untamed beauty of Kilauea, an endeavor that teetered on the edge of danger. Pu'u O'o, their primary focus, was not just a crater, but a maw of geologic fury, a reminder of the Earth's fiery heart. Flying directly over this volatile site was essential for the shot they needed, a maneuver that veered dangerously close to the capricious whims of the volcanic behemoth. As they approached their destination, the reality of their task became increasingly palpable. The scenery shifted from the verdant greens of the jungle to the stark, jagged terrain of volcanic rock. The crater, an enormous bowl of blackened stone, loomed ahead, its heart a churning pit of molten lava, exhaling plumes of volcanic gas. In this moment, the contrast between the serene beauty of Hawaii and the ferocious power of Kilauea couldn't have been starker. For Chris and Mike, this assignment transcended the boundaries of routine work, pushing them into an arena where the awe-inspiring might of nature confronted the limits of human endeavor. Little did they know, as they peered into the crater, that they were on the cusp of an ordeal that would test their resolve, resilience, and the very fabric of their survival instincts. This was not just another day at work. It was a prelude to a disaster of unforeseen magnitude. The helicopter continued its perilous journey, now edging closer to the heart of Kilauea. Inside, Chris Duddy and Mike Benson were acutely aware of the inherent risks, yet driven by the compelling allure of capturing something extraordinary. Under the skilled hands of Craig Hosking, the pilot, the helicopter maneuvered with an agility born of experience, gracefully threading through the skies toward their fateful destination. As they neared Pu'u O'o, the reality of their undertaking became increasingly tangible. The crater, a monstrous bowl of dark volcanic rock, sprawled beneath them, its core a tumultuous cauldron where the Earth's fiery blood churned ceaselessly. The white plume of volcanic gas, rising like a ghostly specter from the crater, was a visual testament to the volatile power they dared to approach. The mood within the helicopter was a cocktail of excitement and apprehension. Chris, with his youthful exuberance, was captivated by the primal spectacle unfolding below. For Mike, the seasoned professional, each flight over such a landscape was a dance with danger, a balance between achieving cinematic excellence and respecting nature's untamed force. As they hovered over the crater, the volatile whims of Kilauea began to manifest. A sudden, capricious shift in the wind direction occurred, an unforeseen hazard that even the most experienced could not predict. In an instant, the helicopter was engulfed in the noxious embrace of volcanic fumes. These toxic vapors, a miasma of sulfur dioxide and other lethal gases, invaded the cabin, assaulting the senses with their acrid, suffocating presence. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The volcanic fumes, dense and disorienting, created an environment hostile not just to the crew, but to the helicopter's very mechanics. The engine, starved of the oxygen it desperately needed to function amidst the toxic cloud, began to falter. The once steady hum of machinery turned into a desperate, choking struggle for life. In the cabin, chaos unfolded. The visibility dropped to near zero, as if they had plunged into a blinding, poisonous fog. Chris gripped his seat, his heart hammering against his chest, a stark contrast to the calm demeanor of Craig. But the reality was far from standard. The helicopter, now a victim to the whims of the Volcano, started to lose its fight against gravity. The descent began, a terrifying plummet that transformed every second into an eternity. Craig's voice cut through the panic, a stark command to brace for impact. Chris turned towards Mike, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange of fear and disbelief. The realization dawned on them with chilling clarity. This was not a scene from a movie. This was a grim, unscripted reality where their lives hung by a thread. The helicopter spiraled downwards, a helpless leaf caught in a maelstrom, each moment a terrifying descent towards the unforgiving volcanic landscape. The world outside was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of toxic fumes and disorienting turbulence. Then, with a shattering force that echoed through their very bones, the helicopter collided with the rugged terrain of Pu'u O'o. The impact was a violent upheaval, a maelstrom of breaking metal and shattering glass. The crew, strapped within, were tossed like rag dolls in the confines of their seats, the world around them collapsing into chaos. As the dust settled and the sounds of destruction faded into an eerie silence, the realization of their predicament set in. They were alive but trapped within the bowels of Kilauea, surrounded by a landscape of peril, the air thick with poison, and their escape uncertain. The crash had not just grounded them physically, but plunged them into a dire struggle for survival, one where the odds were heavily stacked against them. After the catastrophic crash, the battered helicopter lay defeated within the ferocious embrace of Pu'u O'o crater. Chris Duddy, Mike Benson, and Craig Hosking found themselves grappling with the grim reality of their situation. The air was laced with toxic fumes, each breath a battle against the poison that surrounded them. The heat from the volcanic floor radiated aggressively, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. In the immediate aftermath, the trio assessed their situation with a mix of disbelief and pragmatism. Craig, recognizing the urgent need for external help, made the crucial decision to attempt to repair the helicopter's radio. This task required him to remain in or near the wreckage where the equipment was located. Despite the dangers posed by the lingering fumes and the potential instability of the crash site, Craig knew that their chances of rescue were slim without establishing communication. Meanwhile, Chris and Mike, driven by a need to find a safer area away from the toxic fumes and potential further hazards of the crash site, decided to venture out into the crater. Their goal was twofold: to scout for a safer location to wait for rescue and to assess any potential escape routes from the crater if the situation worsened. Given the uncertain nature of their predicament, Chris and Mike understood the importance of not putting all their hopes on the radio repair alone. This separation, although necessary, added another layer of psychological stress to their ordeal. Not only were they battling the physical extremities of their environment, but they were also doing so while split up, each pair unsure of the other's fate. As they navigated this perilous landscape, the mental toll began to mount: isolation, the uncertainty of rescue, and the realization that their thrilling adventure had turned into a life-threatening ordeal. weighed heavily on their spirits. The daunting task of survival became as much a mental battle as a physical one. Meanwhile, battling the suffocating atmosphere and working amidst the wreckage, Craig used a camera battery to power the radio. This resourcefulness was pivotal in establishing a line of communication with the outside world. Once the radio was operational, Craig sent out a distress call, which was eventually received, marking the first step towards their rescue. As the rescue helicopter approached the crater, the cabin was quickly engulfed by the noxious fumes, posing a grave risk to those on board. The pilot almost passed out from the fumes, but a quick-thinking park ranger on board managed to put an oxygen mask on his face, narrowly averting disaster. Despite the challenging conditions, the helicopter circled the crater, searching for an opening in the deadly clouds of steam and smoke to make a rescue attempt. Craig realized the urgency of the situation as the fumes thickened around him. He understood that time was running out, as the fumes could potentially suffocate him. Upon hearing the distant sound of the approaching helicopter, Craig managed to re-enter the crashed helicopter and communicate via the radio, confirming that he was ready for rescue. The rescue pilot communicated to Craig that they were waiting for a break in the fumes, which would be their opportunity to quickly extract him from the crater. Understanding the risks, Craig knew he had to be prepared to run towards the helicopter as soon as it landed, as any delay could turn the landing zone into a death trap due to the shifting winds and fumes. When the helicopter finally found an opening and touched down, Craig sprinted through the limited visibility towards the sound of the helicopter's rotors. Despite stumbling over the rugged terrain, he managed to reach the helicopter, where a park ranger pulled him into safety. As the helicopter lifted off, there was a tense moment when the engine sputtered, raising fears of another stall. Fortunately, the helicopter managed to gain altitude and safely flew out of the crater. Craig, though rescued, was acutely aware that Chris and Mike remained below, their fate hanging in the balance as the helicopter disappeared into the sky. In the wake of Craig's daring rescue from the hazardous confines of the crater, the focus shifted to the plight of Chris and Mike, still entrapped within the volcano. The success of Craig's evacuation had brought a glimmer of hope, yet the situation remained fraught with peril. The rescue teams, coordinated by the Hawaii County Fire Department, faced a formidable challenge. The volcanic terrain of Kilauea was not just treacherous, but the changing weather patterns exacerbated the difficulties. A tropical storm had rolled in, cloaking the area in a shroud of high winds and dense rain, making the prospect of a helicopter rescue perilous. As the storm intensified, making aerial rescue attempts increasingly dangerous, the focus turned to ground efforts. Rescue workers, battling against the elements, scouted the rim of the crater, shouting down into the abyss in hopes of establishing contact with Chris and Mike. But the howling winds and the vastness of the crater made communication nearly impossible. The swirling mass of volcanic steam and gases filled the crater like a cauldron, obscuring any view of the men below. The deteriorating conditions forced the rescue team to make tough decisions. As night approached, the risks of continuing the operation escalated. The rescue workers, themselves exposed to the harsh elements and the dangers of the crater's rim, faced the harrowing decision to retreat and regroup, with plans to resume the rescue at first light. This decision was met with a heavy heart, as it meant leaving Chris and Mike to endure the unforgiving conditions of the crater during the night. In the crater, Chris and Mike, unaware of the efforts being made on their behalf, faced a night of uncertainty and danger. Their struggle for survival continued in the heart of one of nature's most formidable landscapes, as those above endeavored to bring them back to safety. For Chris and Mike, the fall of night introduced new perils to their precarious situation. The contrast between the day's scorching heat, radiating from the volcano's heart, and the night's biting cold was stark and unyielding. Trapped in this harsh duality, they faced not only the physical extremities of their environment, but also an intense psychological battle. The cold gnawed at their bodies, while the fear and uncertainty ate away at their resolve. The darkness around them seemed to mirror the growing despair within, as hope of rescue appeared to fade with each passing hour. As dawn broke over the Hawaiian landscape, painting the sky with streaks of light, the situation inside the crater of Pu'u O'o remained as dire as ever. Chris Duddy and Mike Benson, having endured a harrowing and perilous night amidst toxic fumes and unstable terrain, faced another day of uncertainty. Their hope for rescue was waning, replaced by a growing realization that they might need to save themselves. As the light of the new day filtered through the volcanic haze, Chris, driven by a blend of desperation and determination, made a pivotal decision. He resolved to attempt a daring climb out of the crater. The walls, steep and treacherous, presented a formidable barrier, but for Chris, the prospect of another night in the crater was unthinkable. He shared his plan with Mike, who, despite his reservations about the risks involved, understood Chris's urgency. However, Mike's physical condition, weakened by the ordeal they had endured, including exposure to toxic gases and the physical strain of surviving a helicopter crash, made such a physically demanding climb unfeasible for him. Acknowledging the severity of his situation and the necessity of Chris's climb for their potential rescue, Mike stayed behind while Chris embarked on the perilous ascent. Chris began to scale the crater wall, each movement deliberate and cautious. The sharp volcanic rocks offered precarious handholds and footholds, threatening to give way at any moment. The physical pain, coupled with the mental strain of the climb, was excruciating. Yet, Chris pushed forward, driven by an instinctive desire to survive. With every inch he climbed, the danger of a misstep loomed larger. A fall from this height would not just be injurious, it could be fatal. The rocks, sharp as knives, could easily tear flesh, and the ever-present volcanic fumes threatened to overpower him. Yet, despite these hazards, Chris continued his ascent, clinging to the hope of reaching the crater's rim. Below, Mike watched with a mix of fear and admiration. His own physical condition, coupled with the daunting nature of the climb, made it clear that he could not follow Chris's path. Instead, he offered words of encouragement, his voice a lifeline of support for Chris's treacherous journey. As Chris neared the rim of the crater, the challenge intensified. The slope became steeper, the rocks looser, and the risk of a deadly fall greater. With every breath he took, Chris was painfully aware of the stakes. His hands, cut and bleeding, he made one final, desperate push. With a combination of luck, skill, and sheer willpower, Chris reached the crater's rim, pulling himself over the edge and collapsing onto solid ground. He lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, overwhelmed by a mix of relief, exhaustion, and the surreal realization of what he had just accomplished. After his daring climb out of the crater, Chris found himself in a desolate landscape of cooled lava flows, stretching out like a jet-black sea. Eventually, he was spotted by a park ranger's helicopter, leading to his rescue. Collapsing from exhaustion and the toxic effects of the fumes, Chris was still mindful of Mike's plight, insisting on the need to go back for him. Despite Chris's pleas, the rangers informed him that nobody would be sent into the crater until the weather improved. As another night enveloped the crater, Mike Benson, still trapped within the hostile confines of the crater, confronted a reality that was increasingly distorted by physical exhaustion and the toxic environment. The isolation and the relentless assault of the elements took a heavy toll on his psyche, leading to a state where the lines between reality and hallucination began to blur. The relentless sounds of the bubbling lava and the constant cascade of rocks amplified the sense of danger and instability around him. It was in this heightened state of distress and sensory overload that Mike began to experience vivid hallucinations. As night approached, the crater transformed into an even more treacherous environment. The flickering light from the center of the crater, reflecting off the swirling steam, created eerie shadows and shapes, further feeding into Mike's disoriented state. The sounds of the volcano, the falling rocks, and the shifting shadows of the night compounded his sense of dread. As the first light of dawn pierced the horizon, signaling the end of a second grueling night in the crater, Mike Benson's situation reached a critical juncture. His physical and mental exhaustion had reached their peak, and the relentless volcanic environment continued to pose a severe threat to his survival. The morning brought with it the distant but unmistakable sound of a helicopter. This sound, bouncing off the crater walls, was a beacon of hope for Mike, yet his weakened state made him question whether it was real or another hallucination. His senses, dulled by fatigue and the toxic atmosphere, struggled to determine the reality of the situation. As Mike scanned the murky skies, his heart surged with hope at the sight of a rescue basket swinging on the end of a cable from the helicopter above. The helicopter itself was obscured by the thick clouds of sulfur, making the sight of the basket emerging from the steam all the more surreal and miraculous. The rescue basket's approach was erratic due to the swirling winds, and the helicopter's struggle to maintain a steady position above the crater. Mike, realizing that this might be his only chance for escape, faced a daunting decision. He had to leap from his precarious position on the crater wall to the swinging basket. The risk was immense. A miss could mean a fatal fall onto the sharp rocks below. But the alternative was to remain in the crater with diminishing chances of survival. With determination and a sense of now or never, Mike readied himself. Timing his jump with the basket's swing, he pushed off from the crater wall. The leap was a moment of both desperation and bravery, a literal jump for life. Mike's aim was true, and he landed squarely in the basket, his hands gripping the netting with all the strength he had left. As the basket began to ascend, pulled upward by the helicopter, Mike swung back and forth, still enveloped in the sulfur clouds. The sensation of rising, of leaving the hostile embrace of the crater, was overwhelming. When he finally emerged from the steam, the sight that greeted him was one of relief and beauty, the vast expanse of the crater below and the open skies above. The deep blue of the Pacific Ocean in the distance was a stark contrast to the dark, menacing crater that had been his prison. In the basket, as the helicopter carried him away from the crater, Mike experienced a profound sense of relief and disbelief. His ordeal was finally over. He closed his eyes, breathing in the fresh air, free from the toxic fumes that had choked him for so long. Chris, Mike, and Craig were reunited at the hospital shortly after Mike's rescue. Despite their prolonged exposure to the toxic fumes, they spent only a few days there. None of them suffered permanent lung damage, but Chris says that for months after getting rescued, he could taste sulfur every time he coughed. Researchers believe no one in modern history had ever breathed in volcanic gas as long as Chris and Mike did during their ordeal. Doctors asked them to stay on the island for another week so that their condition could be studied. A week after the rescue, a cargo helicopter was sent to airlift Craig's downed chopper out of the crater. The rotor that snapped off in the crash was never found. The footage Chris and Mike shot for Sliver was never recovered either. Instead, the climactic scene at the volcano was created entirely with special effects and stock footage. During advanced screenings of the film, the scene tested so badly with audiences that it was ultimately cut. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to check out the other great content on our channel. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more. Thank you again, and see you in the next video.